Behind closed doors, made a decision they don't want you to notice. It's not just about recalls, it's about a transformation that could redefine the entire motorcycle world. Stay with me until the end, because what's revealed next may decide whether you'll ever ride a Harley again. Recall shock. The letter did not arrive with ceremony. It came tucked inside a plain white envelope, its language clinical, its tone detached. Yet for thousands of Harley-Davidson Street Glide owners, opening that letter felt like opening a betrayal. The recall notice explained that a defect in the steering assembly could lead to sudden instability at highway speeds. To riders who had trusted the Glide for decades of cross-country trips, the thought of their machine failing at 70 miles an hour was unthinkable. One veteran rider described staring at the page in disbelief, whispering that the bike he once considered unbreakable now looked like a time bomb waiting to detonate. This was not a minor cosmetic blemish or a loose bolt hidden under chrome. Engineers had warned of a failure that could strip away the very promise Harley built its empire on: reliability in motion, safety in freedom. Riders took to forums, their posts trembling with anger. Some called the recall an embarrassment. Others said it shattered the brand's sacred covenant with its community. For a company that sells identity as much as machinery, the fear cut deeper than steel. But the recall was only the beginning, because behind the public apology and the service bulletins, another story was beginning to take shape, one that would rattle not just riders, but the very foundation of Harley's future. And that next story began not with an envelope, but with clogged service bays. Service breakdown. The recall notice told riders to schedule repairs immediately, but when they did, they discovered the system was already collapsing under its own weight. Dealership service departments were swamped, their bays filled with motorcycles waiting for parts that were suddenly scarce. In some regions, riders were told to wait weeks, even months, before a single technician could look at their machines. Summer trips were canceled, anniversary rides postponed, and treasured routines broken. A machine once meant to represent freedom now sat idle in garages like a chained beast. For some, the frustration was logistical. Parts delayed, labor stretched thin, phones ringing off the hook. For others, the damage was emotional. One rider explained that he had planned a bucket list journey across state lines, only to watch the season slip away while his Glide gathered dust. Another said he felt humiliated walking past his silent motorcycle each morning, reminded of the trust he had placed in a company that could not even supply a wiring harness in time. The chaos spread beyond garages. Local dealers strained to calm angry customers while juggling factory instructions. Owners who once boasted of Harley loyalty now spoke of betrayal in parking lot conversations. The recall was no longer just a defect. It was a breakdown of confidence. And while owners stewed in frustration, another group was watching carefully. Because investors do not ride motorcycles, but they read numbers, and the numbers spell danger. If you're feeling the weight of what we've uncovered so far, hit that like button right now. It tells me riders like you want the truth exposed. And drop your thoughts in the comments, because your voice here isn't just feedback. It's part of the conversation Harley never wanted you to have. Investor jitters. Wall Street does not panic at a loose screw. But when 3 recalls strike within months, when production stalls, and when headlines shout betrayal, even seasoned analysts sharpen their pencils. Shares of Harley-Davidson slipped as the recall storm unfolded, erasing hundreds of millions of dollars in market value within days. Brokerages downgraded the stock from buy to hold, citing heightened uncertainty in product reliability. For a brand that had long leaned on its reputation as bulletproof, the market suddenly priced in fragility. Analysts peppered executives with uncomfortable questions. Was Harley rushing models to market without endurance testing? How much would warranty claims eat into margins? And most damning of all, could a company built on chrome and combustion remain relevant in a world where competitors were already sprinting toward electric futures? Behind closed doors, murmurs spread that Harley's future was not in doubling down on gasoline engines, but in shifting, quietly but decisively, toward battery power. To many shareholders, the math was simple. Gasoline models were bleeding confidence, electric promised growth narratives, and Wall Street thrives on stories of reinvention. The recalls, ironically, gave Harley a ready-made excuse to pivot. Instead of explaining quality failures, executives could pitch investors on transformation. And transformation requires leadership, which is why, just as the numbers shook the market, Harley announced a move that stunned even insiders. Its celebrated chief executive was preparing to step down. Control what you can, upgrade your helmet, gloves, and gears, and add the tools that keep your bike honest. Link is in the description. Leadership exit. Chief executives rarely resign during triumphs. They leave during storms, and Harley-Davidson's storm was raging. Jochen Seitz, the man credited with steering the company through pandemic turmoil and supply chain chaos, announced he would retire in the year 2025. On the surface, the decision looked like a personal choice. But inside Harley's glass conference rooms, the whispers told another story. Activist shareholders were circling, proxy fights were brewing, and the board needed a scapegoat to reset investor confidence. The timing raised eyebrows across Milwaukee. The company was still reeling from recalls, its stock sliding, and its customers furious. Why would a leader step aside now unless pressured? Some insiders suggested the board wanted a fresh face to sell a fresh narrative. Others believed Seitz himself refused to become the public shield for engineering failures he did not personally design. Whatever the truth, his exit added another layer of instability at the precise moment Harley required unity. The search for a successor quickly took on symbolic weight. Should Harley elevate a lifer steeped in V-twin culture or import a technologist fluent in batteries and algorithms? The answer would shape not just the company's product line, but its soul. Because the new captain would be tasked with selling a future many riders never asked for, a Harley that hums silently on electrons instead of roaring with pistons. And as the boardroom door closed behind Jochen Seitz, another door creaked open. The door to an identity crisis that would pit tradition against transformation. Resale Crash. A Harley-Davidson has never been just a machine. For decades, it has been a rolling statement of identity, an investment in pride as much as performance. That is why the resale crash following the recall announcements cut so deeply. Within weeks, dealers who once offered premium trade-in values slashed their offers by thousands. Owners who believed their motorcycles would hold value for years suddenly found themselves underwater on loans. The shock was not merely financial, it was personal. Riders described gut-wrenching moments at dealerships. One man who owed more on his street glide than it was now worth explained that he had walked out of the showroom embarrassed, unable to look the salesman in the eye. Another recalled posting his motorcycle online, only to be met with silence because word of the recalls spread too quickly through rider communities. Even when a bike had been repaired, buyers remained wary. The stigma lingered like a scar across the market. For many, this was a cruel reversal of expectation. Harley had always sold itself as an investment in heritage. Now those same motorcycles looked like liabilities, draining wallets instead of building pride. And resentment grows fastest when money is at stake. That resentment, simmering in garages and dealerships, would soon give rivals the opening they had been waiting for. Competitor strike. Indian Motorcycle did not hesitate. As soon as Harley's crisis hit headlines, Indian rolled out aggressive trade-in bonuses. Riders who brought in their Harley, recall or not, were offered thousands above market value if they switched to an Indian Challenger or Roadmaster. It was a direct strike at Harley's wounded core. Advertising campaigns boasted reliability and stability, the exact qualities Harley had just seen questioned. For some frustrated owners, the temptation proved irresistible. Across the Atlantic, Ducati launched its own assault. The Italian brand leaned on prestige and performance, hosting test ride events that invited Harley loyalists to taste something different. The message was subtle but sharp. If your trusted heavyweight has faltered, try a machine proven on tracks and engineered with precision. Dealers doubled the frequency of promotions, and social media feeds filled with glossy videos showing Ducati's craftsmanship in stark contrast to Harley's recall chaos. These campaigns were not merely about sales, they were about seizing Harley's symbolic throne. For decades, Harley had owned the heavyweight touring segment, propped up by an unbreakable cultural aura. Now, with that aura dimming, competitors sensed an opportunity that might not come again for another generation. They knew that once loyalty cracks, it rarely seals again. And while rivals sharpened their knives in the marketplace, another front opened in courtrooms across the country. Because mechanical defects do not only draw buyers away, they also draw lawyers in. Legal Blitz. The legal ads appeared almost overnight. Television commercials featured stern attorneys promising to hold corporations accountable. Online banners targeted Harley owners directly, offering free consultations for anyone affected by the defects. Personal injury firms smelled blood. For them, the recalls were not just mechanical failures. They were potential negligence cases worth millions. Behind the scenes, class action specialists began compiling evidence. They asked whether Harley had known about the flaws months before the recalls were announced. They demanded access to internal engineering reports and testing logs. Discovery motions were drafted, aiming to expose whether the company had withheld information from regulators and the public. If even a single memo suggested prior knowledge, Harley could face not just damages, but punitive penalties meant to send a message. For riders, the lawsuits were a double-edged sword. Some welcomed the possibility of compensation for lost value or near accidents. Others feared that drawn-out litigation would drag Harley's reputation through more mud, further hurting resale and community pride. But for Harley's executives, the threat was clear. Legal fees, settlements, and reputational scars could bleed capital that might otherwise fund the company's planned electric future. And just as lawyers sharpened their arguments, politicians sharpened their speeches. The recall crisis was about to step onto America's biggest stage, the halls of Congress, political stage. When Harley-Davidson executives walked into congressional hearings, they entered a stage built for theater. Cameras rolled as lawmakers from both parties grilled them about safety standards, defect disclosure, and whether corporate priorities had endangered lives. Some senators thundered about consumer rights. Others framed the crisis as evidence of eroding American manufacturing standards. For Harley, the optics were brutal. Clips of executives struggling to answer pointed questions aired on evening news shows. Late-night hosts mocked the spectacle, turning Harley's once proud image into a punchline. Calls grew for stricter oversight, mandatory third-party testing before new motorcycles could reach the market, harsher penalties for delayed recalls, and closer monitoring of manufacturing plants. Regulators who had long relied on voluntary reporting now felt political pressure to tighten the leash. The hearings did more than tarnish Harley's reputation. They shifted the conversation from isolated defects to a national debate about corporate accountability. And as lawmakers delivered their grandstanding sound bites, Harley's customers were watching. Many felt that the brand they once defended had left them exposed. Online groups buzzed not only with frustration, but with coordination. Riders who had always seen themselves as a brotherhood were beginning to organize with a new purpose: to demand change directly. Because while Congress spoke from podiums, Harley's own customers were preparing to speak from the streets, and their voices would not be so easily dismissed. Rider Revolt. When brotherhood cracks, movements form. That was the reality spreading across Harley-Davidson owner forums in the wake of the recall storm. What began as scattered posts of frustration turned into coordinated groups within weeks. Riders who once swapped stories about chrome upgrades and summer rallies now shared repair timelines, legal resources, and strategies to pressure the company. Facebook pages ballooned from a handful of members to hundreds in mere days, with riders pooling data to track which dealerships had parts and which ones left customers stranded. These groups became more than complaint boards. They were advocacy hubs. Riders drafted petitions to state attorneys general, demanding investigations into Harley's quality control. Some even filed coordinated complaints with consumer protection agencies, pushing for faster timelines on repair campaigns. It was a remarkable shift. Men and women who once wore Harley jackets as symbols of loyalty were now wearing them as armor in a fight against the very brand they had celebrated. For many, the transformation was bittersweet. The bike that had once represented freedom now symbolized corporate indifference. Yet the anger gave riders a new sense of unity, one not built by Harley's marketing department, but forged in betrayal and shared struggle. And their rising voices were not lost on the dealerships forced to manage the fallout, because soon, the men and women behind the counters began to crack as well. Dealer frustration. The smiling showroom turned sour behind the counter. Dealers who had long prided themselves on selling dreams now found themselves fielding calls from furious customers, begging for parts and demanding answers. The official memos from Milwaukee offered apologies but little clarity. Service managers confessed privately that they felt abandoned, left to absorb the fury while corporate headquarters spoke in careful press releases. At the same time, Harley was nudging dealers to prepare for a faster shift to electric. That meant training technicians to handle high-voltage systems, purchasing expensive new equipment, and dedicating floor space to LiveWire models that moved far slower than traditional cruisers. For smaller dealerships, the costs were daunting. One dealer admitted that his team had sold only a handful of LiveWire bikes in an entire year, yet he was expected to foot the bill for charging stations and safety certifications. The tension was palpable. Corporate vision was diverging sharply from ground-level reality. Dealers grumbled at industry events, warning that the push to electrify felt less like a strategy and more like a burden dumped on their shoulders. A few even considered cutting back on orders of new gasoline models, fearing unsold inventory would pile up while attention shifted to experimental electrics. Their frustration echoed the riders' sense of betrayal, creating a widening rift between headquarters and the front lines. And as those rifts grew, the pressure passed along to the next link in Harley's chain, the suppliers who kept the entire machine running. Supply strain. You cannot pivot to electric with a rusty supply chain. Harley-Davidson's vendors knew this truth better than anyone, and they were feeling the strain. Retooling factories for battery modules, securing rare earth minerals for motors, and meeting new safety certification standards demanded massive investments. Yet many suppliers whispered that Harley had not given them the long-term guarantees needed to justify such costs. The problem was scale. LiveWire's production numbers remained modest, measured in the thousands rather than the hundreds of thousands. Suppliers faced the paradox of spending millions to prepare for orders that might never arrive in volume. Some smaller vendors simply could not afford the gamble. Others passed costs back to Harley in the form of higher prices, squeezing margins that were already under pressure from recalls and warranty campaigns. At the same time, the existing supply chain for gasoline bikes remained under stress. Warranty repairs demanded a steady flow of steering assemblies, wiring harnesses, and calibration tools. Balancing those urgent demands with the futuristic push toward electric stretched logistics thin. Every shipment delayed, every supplier hesitant, added weight to a system already buckling. Inside boardrooms, executives clung to a single hope, a breakthrough product that could justify the sacrifices. And in the summer, Harley offered a glimpse of that hope with 2 new prototypes, machines meant to showcase what its electric future could look like. LiveWire Prototypes. 2 prototypes promised thrills, but they also spooked loyalists. At the company's much-hyped homecoming event, LiveWire unveiled a pair of smaller, lighter electric motorcycles described as seriously fun. These were not massive touring machines, but nimble, city-friendly designs pitched toward younger riders and urban commuters. Engineers spoke of torque, agility, and simplicity. Executives called them the shape of things to come. Yet among Harley's faithful, the reaction was mixed. Many riders saw stripped-down electrics as an insult to the heritage of heavyweight cruisers. Online forums lit up with comments accusing the company of abandoning its soul. Where was the rumble, the chrome, the sense of gravitas? In their eyes, these prototypes might appeal to new demographics, but they left the core audience feeling ignored. Even dealers admitted privately that they were unsure how to sell fun electrics to customers who still asked for thunder in their engines. Still, the prototypes represented more than styling experiments. They were proof that Harley was willing to disrupt itself before rivals fully captured the electric space. Whether that gamble would save the brand or fracture it further remained uncertain. For now, one thing was clear. Harley's fight was no longer only about fixing recalls. It was about deciding what kind of company it wanted to be. And that question would echo far beyond dealerships and supply chains, spilling into labor halls, investor briefings, and even the corridors of government. Worker stakes. Electric pivots are not just corporate strategies, they are payroll decisions. On factory floors from Wisconsin to Pennsylvania, Harley-Davidson employees whispered about what the future meant for their jobs. The recall crisis had already made workers uneasy, but the prospect of a rapid electric transition magnified those fears. Unlike the intricate assembly of a V-twin engine with countless moving parts, electric motors are simpler, requiring fewer hands and different skills. That raised the question, who would still have a role when the shift was complete? Unions seized the moment. Leaders argued that the recalls proved what they had been warning for years, that speed and cost-cutting were prioritized over quality and safety. Now they demanded more than wage increases. They wanted stronger inspection protocols, better training, and a formal seat at the table as the company rewired its production lines for electric. Some workers staged symbolic walkouts, holding banners that asked whether Harley's future had room for the people who built its past. The tension was not only about machinery but about culture. Employees who once took pride in crafting roaring engines now faced the prospect of building quiet machines that did not resonate with their own identities. The clash between heritage and change was as sharp on the shop floor as it was in boardrooms. And the battle over labor was about to intersect with another battlefield, the expectations of Wall Street investors. Investor stakes. Markets do not forgive, they reprice. After the string of recalls, Harley-Davidson's stock suffered a sharp decline, erasing billions in market value within a year. Investors grew restless, not just because of warranty costs, but because of uncertainty about the company's direction. Analysts trimmed growth forecasts, arguing that margins would remain under pressure as Harley balanced recall expenses with the immense capital required to scale LiveWire and its new electric prototypes. Shareholders demanded clarity. Would the company continue propping up underperforming electric divisions, or would it set firm targets for profitability? Some activist investors pressed for faster cuts to legacy programs, while others worried abandoning core gasoline models would accelerate customer defections. The contradiction was glaring. Harley could not please both camps at once. Wall Street wanted assurances that electric bikes could sell in the tens of thousands, but the loyalists wanted the rumble of tradition. Behind closed doors, executives weighed how much capital to commit to electric expansion while keeping dividends alive. Some floated partnerships or licensing deals to share the burden of battery sourcing and research. Others warned that without bold investment, Harley risked being left behind by more agile competitors. The tension between caution and ambition defined every earnings call. And as investors argued over numbers, regulators saw an opening to impose their own vision on the industry. Regulatory stakes. One company's stumble can become everyone's rulebook. The congressional hearings on Harley-Davidson's recalls created momentum for stricter oversight across the motorcycle sector. Lawmakers floated proposals requiring faster defect disclosures, mandatory third-party endurance testing, and steeper penalties for delays. Regulators also eyed the electric shift, considering new safety standards for high-voltage batteries, thermal containment, and dealer training for emergency protocols. For Harley, this meant more than public embarrassment. It meant navigating a future where compliance costs could rise sharply. What once had been voluntary cooperation with regulators risked becoming codified law, enforced with fines. Other manufacturers, sensing opportunity, leaned into the narrative. Brands with cleaner reputations touted their rigorous testing and extended warranties, hoping to turn Harley's stumble into a permanent competitive advantage. The industry began to change its posture. Insurance companies tightened requirements, demanding more transparency on defect timelines. Suppliers adjusted contracts to reflect stricter liability clauses. Even overseas partners began drafting contingency plans, worried that American regulatory changes could ripple across global markets. The fallout from Harley's crisis was no longer confined to Milwaukee. It was reshaping the rules of motorcycling everywhere. And while regulators rewrote standards and competitors exploited the moment, the most important question still remained unanswered. What would all of this mean for the everyday rider standing in a showroom, trying to decide whether their next bike should be Harley or something else? You've seen how deep this goes, but trust me, we're only scratching the surface. If you don't subscribe right now, you'll miss the next chapter as it breaks. Hit that button and stay ahead, because once this story moves, it moves fast, and the riders who know first win first. Consumer stakes. Your next bike is a referendum. For ordinary riders, the decisions made in boardrooms, union halls, and congressional hearings translate directly into the showroom. Resale values for affected models remain depressed, leaving some owners stuck with loans that outweigh the worth of their bikes. Insurance companies are adjusting premiums, citing the risks revealed by recent recalls. Meanwhile, dealerships are dangling discounts on gasoline models to clear inventory, tempting buyers with deals that mask deeper uncertainty. For potential electric converts, the landscape is equally complicated. LiveWire promises agility and torque, but charging infrastructure is inconsistent, and dealer support still lags. Riders weigh whether to gamble on a new platform that may or may not hold value. Many ask themselves whether buying a Harley today means investing in a legacy or in an experiment. Consumers also sense the cultural shift. For decades, buying a Harley was about joining a tribe, about sharing a roar on the highway. Now the tribe itself is divided, split between those clinging to heritage and those curious about transformation. Every purchase carries a message about which side of the divide a rider stands on. And just as riders confront those choices, another challenge looms on the horizon. Because beyond recalls, lawsuits, and electric pivots, a quieter threat is emerging: government fines for customizations riders once took for granted. That story, just beginning to unfold, may change not only what bikes we ride, but what freedoms we can express through them. Harley's story isn't finished, and neither is yours. What you just saw is only the beginning of a fight shaping the future of riding, freedom, and identity. Don't just walk away. Share this with riders who need to know, comment with your take, and subscribe right now, because the next chapter is already unfolding, and you'll want to be first in the saddle.